morning everyone, and welcome to today's State of the Service Roadshow event. My name is Phil Lancaster and I work at the Australian Public Service Commission here in Canberra. Today's event has a very different look and feel to our usual approach to this event series, but I very much hope that you'll find the next 70 minutes or so informative and engaging, and perhaps even inspiring. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land here in Canberra that I'm speaking from this morning. I'd like to extend that acknowledgement to the traditional custodians on whose country you are participating from, as well as to their elders and any other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues who might be participating in today's event. Before I get into the detail of today's event, did you know that the APS as an institution has its own presence on social media? So if you're interested in keeping up to speed on things across the service, I'd encourage you to follow us on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Twitter and on Instagram. Details of those platforms are coming up on the screen now. So this is a whole series of events right across Australia, starting with the Canberra launch event, which took place in February, and it took place in the former House of Representatives chamber in Old Parliament House in Canberra. Video from that event is available on the APSC website, and I do encourage you to check it out if you have a moment. At that event, you'll hear from the Honourable Ben Morton MP, Assistant Minister to the Minister for the Public Service, addressing the APS on the great work that was done throughout 2020, and also announcing details about the new APS Academy and the upcoming APS exhibition at the Museum of Australian Democracy. There's also a presentation from APS Commissioner Peter Woolcott on the state of the service in 2020. We've also had a number of state-based events, and it's been really great to see the strong engagement from APS colleagues thus far around Australia. We usually do face-to-face events, so a purely virtual approach is not our preference, but there's no doubt that it has enabled many more people to participate. And to complement today's event, you can also find state-based statistical slideshows on the state of the service on the APSC website. Today's event will be in two parts. Firstly, we'll have a Q&A session with Pat Hetherington, First Assistant Commissioner here at the Australian Public Service Commission, to answer questions submitted from the online audience via Slido. We'll then move to the second part of today's event, which is a panel discussion on the topic of spirit of service. We have two of our Northern Territory-based colleagues who've agreed to talk a little bit about what it means for them to be APS employees, and to give some personal reflections on the last 12 months. Then we'll go to a Q&A session with the panel, where they'll answer some pre-prepared questions, but also questions submitted from the online audience via Slido. That's it for the introductions. I'm very pleased to welcome First Assistant Commissioner Pat Hetherington to answer your questions as part of this first Q&A session. The top one at the list, at the top of the list there is about the reform agenda. So you mentioned the reform agenda, and the question there, Pat, about how that's going to affect people who are working in Darwin, I guess, in the Northern Territory more broadly.
So, great question. There are a number of aspects to that, actually, that are worth discussing. So the first is, I mentioned the surge reserve, but the surge reserve is really just a component of a broader mobility framework. We're very much hoping that we can achieve capability building across the public service by creating opportunities for people to experience other agencies, to experience other ways of doing work. So both through surge, as an example, where there's a crisis and we call on a surge reserve, if you're a member of that, you have an opportunity to volunteer to potentially work in other agencies on different work, building your networks out, broadening your understanding of how the APS delivers. As a part of that same mobility framework, we're looking at targeted opportunities to give people rotations, particularly graduates coming into the service, to give them rotations in other agencies. We're particularly keen on service delivery rotations so that our new APS employees have the opportunity to work with the Australian public, people that we serve. But also there'll be opportunities for kind of targeted capability building through mobility. And then the last feature of that mobility framework is task forces. So where we bring together people with different skills, different backgrounds from different agencies to solve complex problems. I think we've done a lot of work in that space to kind of regularise the use of task forces where it makes sense to do so. And these are opportunities for people to come together and again learn from their peers, learn from colleagues on how things can be done differently, how things are done differently across different agencies, and take that back to your home agency. I think if COVID has taught us anything, our ability to work remotely has vastly improved over the last year or so. And so I think for people in Darwin, those opportunities are now going to be more available than they perhaps have been in the past. So I'd encourage, if you're interested in those things, sign up to the Surge Reserve. Look for those opportunities to work in sort of task forces on problems that you've got an interest in. And think about what opportunities there might be for you to get some experience in other agencies, whether that's on a temporary basis or on a permanent basis.
Excellent, thanks, Pat. There are a couple of, I guess, follow-up questions to that. There's one specific one there down the bottom. Is the APS doing anything to support delivery of the government's developing Northern Australia agenda in terms of moving more public servants to northern cities? So I don't know if there's anything further you can add to what you've just said about that broader mobility piece.
Yeah, look, I think I've probably said most of what I wanted to say around the mobility front, and I can't talk specifically to the government's developing Northern Australia agenda, but I think it is fair to say that we certainly want to be able to leverage the unique talents and skills that people in the Northern Territory have, and whether that's by giving people the opportunity to move between agencies to have those rotations, or whether that's by moving people permanently and people taking time outside of the Northern Territory to build skills, then we're certainly interested in all of those things.
Excellent. So you did touch on flexible work, and this has been a theme that has come up quite frequently in these State of the Service Roadshow events. And we've got a question there about whether flexible work is going to expand. Will more Canberra roles, I guess that more traditionally, roles that are seen as traditionally Canberra-based, will more of those roles be available to people who are located outside Canberra, do you think?
So I might start on the flexible work piece there. There's no doubt that flexible work is an important component of our employee value proposition. One of the things that attracts people to the public service is the capacity to work flexibly, whether that's working remotely, whether that's working part-time. There are a range of different flexible work arrangements that are in place in the public service. We've always had them. Prior to COVID-19, I think the census would tell us that around 22% of people were taking up flexible work arrangements. And certainly we've proven over the last little while that we're able to employ flexible work arrangements, whether that's remote working or other, at scale. So I think that's been a real positive for us. The caution I would have on that is, it's not sort of flexible work for the sake of flexible work. There needs to be a real productivity angle to this, and I think flexible work needs to be consistent with the requirements of the workplace and the employer. So the employer and employee need to come to an arrangement on what flexible work would look like, because at all times we've got to make sure we are delivering for Australians. We've got to make sure that we are delivering on government's commitments and policy priorities. And in some instances, flexible work's not quite the right approach to that. But it's not going away. It's certainly not going away. Will more Canberra roles be available to people outside of Canberra? I imagine the answer to that is probably yes. I mean, we here in the Commission successfully have a number of people who are posted outside of Canberra, and they're doing very important roles. We've got people in Townsville, we've got people in Sydney, we've got people all over the place who deliver on their priorities, deliver on the work we need them to do absolutely perfectly remotely. And so I imagine that if people want to seek those opportunities to do different roles that perhaps traditionally have just existed in Canberra, I dare say that will be an opportunity for people.
Excellent. We've got a couple of questions on the Academy. Firstly, a very good but a very technical question. How can we access the Academy from a remote area with poor internet coverage?
I'm not sure how I can help you on the poor internet coverage piece. Just hopefully the NBN successfully rolls out to where you are in due course. But certainly a lot of COVID-19 has been great in 2020 for expanding our thinking on how we deliver L&D opportunities virtually, and a lot of our programs switch quite seamlessly to virtual delivery. And as we build the academy, we are absolutely thinking about how do we create the right content for virtual delivery so that everybody has access to those programs. That's not to say we're going to walk away completely from face-to-face. There are certain things that lend themselves to face-to-face learning. But I think what you'll see into the future is a far more hybrid approach. Things that can be done virtually will be done virtually. There'll be a mix of virtual and physical for some things, and there'll be some physical things where it makes sense to do that. So virtually, you should have access to everything in the academy, notwithstanding internet connection problems. And where it is something that we're delivering face-to-face, we're going to look for some opportunities to partner up with agencies in locations so that we can continue to deliver those things across the country.
Excellent. Still on the academy, look, it's an issue that's been in the news recently. So will the academy have programs on harassment and bullying? And I guess it's probably fits within that broader integrity piece as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, the program, the academy will have a program on integrity, and at the heart of that, we're going to be talking about APS values, etc. And bullying and harassment is absolutely, completely inconsistent with APS values. What we're keen to do is not necessarily duplicate what's out there. I know a lot of agencies and departments have very comprehensive training around bullying and harassment. Where it makes sense to centralise some of that stuff within the academy, we will do that. So we don't want to duplicate things that are working effectively within departments and agencies. So I suppose the first step in that is to do a bit of a scan of the environment, see what's there, see what's best practice. There's an awful lot of information that's available out there on bullying and harassment from people like Comcare that we would seek to leverage. Once we've done that piece, then we'll look at what the academy could deliver on that front. But absolutely critical. I mean, as a service, historically the sorts of numbers we see in this space are not large, but there is no tolerance for this stuff. It's something that we've got to be ever vigilant about, and one way of getting after that is enhancing our training in this space and making sure that people understand what it means to be a public servant and what you sign up for when you become a public servant.
Excellent. And what about cultural competency training? Particularly the question highlights in the Indigenous space, but I imagine it not necessarily exclusively Indigenous cultural competency training. Is that something the Academy is going to look at? Again,
I mean, so this is an area, frankly, that if we're going to achieve the aspirations we've set for ourselves in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander workforce strategy, in the disability strategy, in the gender strategy, and deliver on our workforce strategy, this is an area where we've got to focus. We really do need to build the cultural capability of our people in the service. I'd say that broadly. That also applies to the Indigenous space. And is a real focus at the moment. Now, whether the Academy delivers it or whether we leverage what's being delivered by agencies currently or something else, yet to be determined. But again, I do see a role for the Academy in this space. This is one of those things that is core, I think, for APS employees. Cultural competence is something that we all need. So I do see a future where the Academy has a role to play in this, whether that's delivering courses or organising courses in its own right, or leveraging agencies who do this stuff well, yet to be determined. I would say there's always going to be a space for agencies doing something that is contextually right for them in the cultural competence space, and we don't want to detract from that. But broadly, I see a role for the Academy in this space.
Excellent. And there's only one more question there, but I'm pretty sure that that's actually been addressed. It's going back to mobility and opportunities to increase mobility, and I think we've covered that one. And it's certainly, look, mobility has been, again, a recurring theme through these roadshow events. People are interested in learning about opportunities and how best to take advantage of those opportunities. So with no more questions, I might, we're running a bit ahead of time, but that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And Pat, I might just put you on the spot with a sort of a segue into some of what we're going to be talking about with the panel, which is personal reflections on what it means to be a public servant. Can I ask you a piece of advice that you would give your younger self early on in your APS career?
Yeah, good question. And before I answer that question, hey, thank you for all the questions that have been asked already. They're great questions. And hopefully you see some change in that space. I mean, the mobility piece, I'm really excited about the opportunities that brings for us. So, series of great questions. Advice I'd give my younger self is take a few more risks. Take some of the opportunities that present to throw yourself into something where you're uncertain, where you're nervous about something, because that's where the growth happens, right? So if you sit in your comfort zone, very difficult to learn new things. You want to find that sweet spot where you're under a bit of pressure, not so much pressure that you're paralysed, but you pressure yourself into learning how to do things in different ways. I reflect on COVID's topical. I had a wonderful opportunity to spend some time in Services Australia. I talked very briefly about the mobilisation of public servants into Services Australia to process job seeker claims. I was seconded to Services Australia to help mobilise that APS workforce, amongst other things. And what an opportunity. I mean, day in, day out, I was talking with small businesses who were really doing it tough. I was working with all of our APS secondees down there. I was working with service delivery partners for Service Australia. And it was just very difficult, a lot of pressure, and obviously we wanted to do the right thing. But I never felt more connected to the Australian public as I did in that moment. And really that's why we're all here. As a public servant, that is what we do. And so, take those opportunities where they present themselves, really grab a hold of them, learn what you can, do what you can, because I think you'll look back on those moments as some of the best in your career.
Awesome. Thanks, Pat. That's really great to have that personal reflection as well. So we'll draw this first part of today's event to a close. Thanks to Pat for your time. And we'll move into our panel discussion, which is, as I said, is on the topic of spirit of service. So again, Slido remains open. Please don't hesitate to put questions to our two panellists today into Slido, which, and the reason I asked Pat that question just there is because this is really about drawing on the personal experience and reflections of some of our APS colleagues to try to, I guess, highlight something of the diversity that exists across the APS, but then the spirit of service, the ethos of service that really fundamentally underpins everything that we do as public servants. So yes, Slido is open. Please put stuff in there, and let me introduce our two panellists for today. So firstly, we have Deborah Katona from the National Indigenous Australians Agency. Deborah's been in the Darwin office of NIAA since December 2020. She's responsible for leading reviews into the Stronger Futures legislation, as well as the review into the National Partnership of Remote Aboriginal Investment. Deborah has policy responsibility for alcohol within the Northern Territory, and she's worked in Indigenous affairs through various machinery of government changes over the last 10 years. She's also worked in the employment portfolio and in Aboriginal hostels. Deborah has recently, just last year, completed a Master of Public Policy at Charles Darwin University with the support of a Pat Turner Scholarship. And if you don't know about the Pat Turner Scholarships, I might ask Deborah actually in a sec just to speak a little bit about those, because that is a really fantastic initiative. And she previously had done a Bachelor of Arts in History from University of WA. Deborah is an Aboriginal woman with family connections to areas within Kakadu National Park within the Northern Territory. So thanks very much for making the time to be with us this morning, Deborah.
Thanks for having me.
And our second panellist is Holly Pedersen from the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources, and specifically the Office of Northern Australia. And we actually had a question which was very specifically, that wasn't you, was it, Holly, putting that question through about the Office of Northern... No.
No, it wasn't.
So Holly joined the APS in 2017 when she returned home to Darwin after 10 years overseas and 4 years interstate. Holly has held various roles within the Office of Northern Australia since joining the APS, all based in Darwin. and covering a wide range of responsibilities from policy development to communications and stakeholder engagement to responding to Senate inquiries and Senate estimates. Holly has also worked in local government. She's worked for the Northern Territory government, and she's also got some industry experience behind her as well. Holly has degrees in communications and arts and postgrad qualifications in applied economics. So look, thanks very much, Holly, for making the time to be with us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
So, as I said, we're really interested in unpacking people's personal experiences as part of this discussion. So I'm going to start, and I've got some pre-prepared questions, but then we'll move into questions that come through via Slido. So I'm going to start by asking both Deborah and Holly to reflect briefly on the topic spirit of service. What does spirit of service mean to both of you? And we might go to Deborah first.
I think the spirit of service helps us to think about our job as public servants. For me, there's 3 levels within that category. It's serving, firstly, our minister as public servants. That's our primary role. We serve our senior executive at all times. And then I work in an area that focuses on social policy, focused on Indigenous Australians. And for a lot of people, we're drawn to this policy area because of our commitment to serving the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community. I think the spirit of the service is embodied in principles that we bring to the workplace. Principles such as hard work, determination, perseverance in the workplace. It's something that we all can say that we've used in our work, but also bringing an intellectual rigour to the way we do work and the way we focus on daily activities. The spirit of service really for me is underpinned by quality, and that's about the personal quality that each of us can bring to our daily tasks, which underpin the 3 service areas of, in my case, community, the senior executive and our minister of the day.
Excellent, thanks for that. And Holly, what about you? What does spirit of service mean to you?
Good morning. I would definitely echo everything Deb said this morning. I think, that same ethos and those same principles are applicable very broadly. We, at the end of the day, serve the government of the day, so we have a responsibility to deliver on the policies that they put forward. I think it's the heart and mind for me. So it's both the intellectual rigour that Deb talked about, where we get to think about complex problems and develop solutions that work for the people that we carry in our heart and the people in our context up here. In my context, it's Northern Australia. I'm from the Territory. And we work across the Northern Australia agenda, which was raised earlier, not by me. But it is delivering for those people and for our communities, as Deb said as well, and applying the resilience, the understanding of the complex areas in which we work and the differences between perhaps down south or overseas, and how we can problem solve for the people that we serve.
Actually, I might put an unscripted question to both of you. Sorry, we're going off the script straight away. But mobility has come up. And look, every single one of these events, people across Australia, APS employees, our colleagues across Australia are interested in mobility. So I'd be interested in you both have had fairly mobile careers by the looks of things. So I'd be interested in your reflections on that mobility question and your experience of it, and what opportunities you've had, how you've taken advantage of them, and how you've managed that working outside Canberra. So maybe, Holly, if I can just go back to you on that one.
Sure. So I've never worked in Canberra, but I think one thing within the Office of Northern Australia, so we're pretty geographically dispersed. So we have the headquarters based here in Darwin. We have offices in Cairns, Townsville, people in Brisbane, in Canberra, and we have had and soon to have again, hopefully someone in WA. So we have, responsibility for both coordinating the implementation of policy that is primarily based out of Canberra. So a lot of the implementation is based in Canberra, but we're mostly in the north. We also develop policy outside of Canberra. So I think for us, and some of the work I've done around leading Senate inquiry responses, preparing for estimates for our executive and that kind of thing, which is really traditionally very Canberra-based. We've been really exemplary in showing that that can be done outside of Canberra, and we work really well across our teams. So I don't work to any directors based in Darwin, although I have. So I suppose in terms of mobility for us, it's about where can you deliver from, and whether that's from your home, whether that's from a state office or a regional office, it's understanding that you don't need to be somewhere that is only Canberra to deliver those things. And I think that's something that we do particularly well. In terms of broader mobility, I was actually really lucky to have an opportunity to take a year's leave without pay and work in industry. So I went and worked for an oil and gas company up here for almost a year, and I was, but those opportunities were because in a lot of ways I don't have an opportunity to go and work in maybe a minister's office or as a DLO or something like that. So it's seeking opportunities and being supported to seek those opportunities and then come back where you might not have those same opportunities in Canberra. But I think we have real opportunity as well to do things outside of the norm because we're based in regional offices. So things appear and it's kind of like, okay, well, can you go to that where something might only be an SES or at a more senior level? We get those opportunities because we're remotely located and because we have a smaller presence, I suppose. So I think mobility for the Office of Northern Australia is about understanding someone's capability and those attributes and the experience and applying it in a way that supports the work that we do.
Excellent. Yeah, that's really interesting. What about you, Deb? What's your sort of reflection and experience of mobility been?
Well, in a way, I'm a product of a highly mobile workforce. I began my work career with the public service in Perth. I then worked in the Darwin offices of the employment agency at the time. After that, I moved to Canberra. I spent a little more than 7 years. After that, I almost did the polar opposite from working in the executive office of the agency. I went out and worked in what was considered like a remote office for the agency in Kununurra, which is in the top end of Western Australia, somewhere between Darwin and Broome. After that, I took an opportunity that was provided by the public service to return to study, 2 years full time, and now I've returned to the Darwin office. So that's been quite a journey across different locations. I've worked across different agencies. I've worked across different areas within agencies. I think, firstly, it suits my personality type. I do adapt well to change. I have been able to explore those options of, physically moving across state borders. And I've been able to take advantage of really varied opportunities that have been offered to me. I think that has helped me understand our agency's business, understand the levels of business, and across different work areas. Even, I've done time in budget areas, I've done time in policy areas and service delivery. So that covers a real breadth of public service activity. as far as career progression goes, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's impacted my career positively. I think that I can look at colleagues who I've worked with over many, many years who have stayed in single locations, and we're at similar points of our career trajectories. We've just gone about learning skill sets and experience in different ways. So I think, while mobility is great and it's jump at the chance if you get the opportunity and you've got the life dynamics to be able to take advantage of those opportunities, but staying in the one location doesn't necessarily limit you and the possibilities for your career.
Thanks for that. I think that's actually an excellent insight, because we present mobility as being a really good thing, and it is. It clearly is, but there's no one-size-fits-all approach, and people should not feel constrained. You mentioned, Deb, about that it suited your personality type. People who don't want to take up mobility opportunities, people who don't want to move, should not in any way, shape or form feel constrained to do that if they really don't want to. So it's important for every individual, I guess, to find what works for them and where they will feel like they're able to be fulfilled in the work environment. You mentioned the 2-year study, Deb. Now's probably that's a good segue into what I flagged that I wanted to ask you about, which is, I'm assuming that's the Pat Turner Scholarship. Could you just let us know a bit more about that?
Yeah, it was a really great opportunity. I'll start off by giving an overview. So the Pat Turner Scholarship sits within the Sir Roland Wilson Foundation. So Sir Roland Wilson was a former Treasury Secretary and has sponsored a scholarship program specifically for Commonwealth public servants. Initially, the Sir Roland Wilson Foundation supported public servants to undertake PhDs. So it offered PhD level qualifications for public servants. The Pat Turner Scholarship is a new initiative named after one of our the most senior public servant over the course of the public service is Pat Turner. And that provides the opportunity specifically for Aboriginal public servants to aim for either Masters or PhD qualifications. So I applied through NIAA and was successful in being supported to do a Master in Public Policy through Charles Darwin University. So it really is a great opportunity. I was supported with paid leave to leave my workplace and undertake full-time study.
It is a really great initiative, and so anyone who's interested in learning more about that, there is the Sir Roland Wilson Foundation web. If you just Google Sir Roland Wilson Foundation, they have a great website with lots of information about both the PhD scholarship, the Sir Roland Wilson scholarships, and the Pat Turner scholarships. Holly, we might go back to the scripted questions, and I might come back to you now, and the question about what prompted you to join the APS in the first place.
So I don't think I'm a traditional APS employee. I didn't come through a graduate program. I was in my 30s when I joined the APS. I'd spent 10 years overseas and then 4 years interstate. So I had a gap decade, I like to call it, prior to studying. But I did a broad range of things through that time. I lived in 6 countries, did a couple of degrees, learned a couple of languages, had some broad industry experiences, that kind of thing. And came home because I was homesick. And joined the APS because I wanted to give back. I feel like I've been blessed and have had a lot of opportunities. And at the end of the day, I'm passionate about Northern Australia and particularly the Northern Territory. I think we have so much to offer, and there is, such opportunity. APS fluence, how it is and the end goal is to have the best place that it can be, and the APS offers that opportunity where you are a part of that, whether it's delivering services, whether it's developing economic policy that really benefits, the large Indigenous population that we have up here, as well as, everyday business and to create a beautiful life that benefits all of Australia. And that's really, it's the heart and the mind. It's also, we get to apply intellectual rigor to the things that we do, and doing it in a way that, is supporting a country and a place that you love and want to be in and see yourself in for the future.
Excellent. We just had some couple of technical glitches while you were talking there, but
no.
It was. I think we could follow. I could follow here, so I trust everyone else was able to follow. It was just for a brief moment. I'd like to pick up on a comment you made about not being a typical APS employee, because actually, if there's one thing that doing this series, yeah, that's right, doing this series of events has highlighted. I've asked this question to a lot of people now, and I don't know if there is such a thing as a typical APS employee nowadays. There are some more common pathways and entry mechanisms and pathways through the service, but yeah, the diversity of people's experience of A, why they joined the service, and B, how they've progressed or the experiences they've had through it are, there's a huge diversity there, which makes up part of the richness of the APS as an institution. And Pat alluded to that in his comments earlier. So, Deb, what about you? What prompted you to join the APS?
My answer is not quite as linked to benevolence, really, as Holly's. Mine was a little bit more one of self-interest, really. I was over 30. I was looking for what I thought I needed, and that was a stable career that would give me some financial security. And my big aim when I joined was, well, I attempted to join initially, was to just feel.
Oh, sorry, Deb, we've lost you there. I'm not quite sure what's happening. It was glitching a little bit, and now it looks like it's cut out completely. Not sure where that. What can we do? Technical issues happen from time to time. Is Holly still there, or have we lost? Looks like Holly's frozen as well. Are you WhatsApping them, Kel?
Yeah. Do you want me to ask them to?
Is that us or is it them? Are we still going out on GovTeams? So, look, apologies everyone who's connected. I'm not quite sure what is happening with the technical side of things. We're just trying to get the connection back. It was obviously a little bit unstable just at the end there. So bear with us while we try and work out exactly what's happening and how we can resolve the situation. Oh. Deb's
Yeah,
back.
I'm just checking if you could hear me. I had to log off and log back in because everything froze.
Yeah, that's right, and it froze on our end as well.
Right.
So, and we just, but you're back. That's great. It was a little bit glitchy. It was a little bit unstable, and then it just dropped out completely. So I'm not quite sure if that's up in Darwin or if it's in Canberra, or if a satellite just got taken out by a piece of space junk, or which I was
One of those things.
Yeah, whatever it is, it's clearly not something that we are able to control. It's interesting, you mentioned before it cut out, you mentioned about it not being as a benevolent a reason for joining the APS as what Holly was saying. That's another thing that has a number of people have mentioned. You know, even when we did the launch event for this series at Old Parliament House, the Deputy Secretary from PM&C was very frank in saying that the only reason she joined the public service was because they offered her a job.
Yeah, and mine was really about what I identified from the outside of what the public service was, and that was a stable workplace.
Yep.
And even though I've been a public servant for coming up to 15 years, I think, and it has provided me a level of stability even within the umbrella of the public service. There has been a lot of change, and I've taken advantage of, you know, quite a few mobility opportunities. So when I first entered the public service, I was looking for a stable job. And but I think really what I didn't realise at the time was within the umbrella of the public servants, there's a great deal of opportunity to not only be employed, but to gain skills, to have access to varied opportunities, and to actually have career progression as well.
Yeah. That actually is not an uncommon experience as well. So when we do the census and look at the census results, it's more about the job, the conditions, and the flexibility and the stability and the work conditions that are offered by the public service that are the key attractors for people. It's not the pay. The pay is not the top of the list, but it's more about stability and work conditions. So while we're waiting to see if we can get Holly back, there's the question that's come through specifically for you, Deb, on Slido, which is around how we can inspire more young Indigenous people to consider joining the APS. And I would probably add to that, actually, not just to consider joining the APS, but then also to stay in the APS, because I think that's also part of the equation as well. So what would your thoughts on that be?
Well, I think for young people generally, and especially Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, to know the diversity of the jobs within the service that are available, everything from engagement, service delivery, to corporate areas, to specialist areas like the science-based areas as an example. If whatever you are interested in, and there is an area within the public service that you could provide benefit to. And I think people aren't really aware of the diversity. I think not necessarily that Aboriginal people need to be influenced to come in, but I think too there's a piece of work for the public service to provide pathways in that support Aboriginal people into the agencies. And I know that there's a number of programs in place to do with internships, cadetships, apprenticeships to get Aboriginal people of all ages into the public service, and then, off into various areas to work.
Yeah, okay, excellent. I'd be interested in what has been your proudest moment during your time in the APS. Is there one thing that you look back on as being something that has really stood out as something that you're proud of, either that you did or that you were part of?
I have worked in lots of different areas and lots of individual products that I'm extremely proud of the work that I've put into. Sometimes it's hard to dissect exactly what your role is, especially in really large projects. I know that, there's definite periods where I've worked hard and really difficult work programs. I think as far as pros, being awarded the opportunity for the Pedersen scholarship, it was a consolidation of the way or how the agency showed their view of my work in the agency. So they felt that I was worth investing in. And to me, that summed up probably my work career over many different years through many different roles. So I was very proud to be given that opportunity, and I took the weight of that opportunity heavily.
Yeah, okay. Excellent. Oh, thanks for sharing that. Holly, welcome back. Apologies for the technical issues. This is, we've all been experimenting over the last. Yeah, that's right. It is, isn't it? And look, at the end of the day, technology does a lot, but sometimes, there are things that you just can't control. So look, it's great that you're back. We'll just have to play it by ear and see. Hopefully, the connection remains stable. I'll put that same question that I just put to Deb to you, Holly. I'm not sure if you heard, but it's about your proudest moment during your APS career, something that you've done or that you've been part of. What would that be for you?
I don't know that I have a single proudest moment, but I think I have a proudest momentum, for lack of a better term. So one thing that we were doing before COVID happened was really embracing and I suppose living a flexible but flexible approach to work with the curveballs that life throws you. So for me, I had a period of illness where I needed to be really flexible in the way I worked. I had to be able to work from home, for certain times. And we already, within the Office of Northern Australia, had a really flexible approach to things because of office being in certain regions, you needed to have a flexible approach to where you were able to work. So whether that was working from home as opposed to an office space or that kind of thing. So that was something that we put a lot of work into, and we've since been kind of approached, and we are now, I suppose, an example of best practice within our department. So that's something that I'm really proud of because it's had an ongoing and integral effect to the way our department works, particularly during COVID. We were approached by a lot of areas. How do you guys work so flexibly? How does your team manage to stay connected? How do you do these things? What are your what are the challenges? What are the opportunities? What are the ways that you've worked? What's worked well, what hasn't? And we've rolled out some projects, I suppose, around video conferencing etiquettes and how to stay connected across teams when you work really diversely and really geographically distant to each other. And because we'd already been doing that really well and really effectively, we were able to really influence and be a big part of how our department moved forward with that. And that's something I'm really proud of because it's had a really positive impact during a really difficult time for a lot of people.
And there's no doubt that that people who know how to do this stuff well have across the service have had an opportunity to share those learnings over the last 12 months, haven't they? I mean, we've all been thrown in the deep end, and it has highlighted that some people were already sort of swimming quite comfortably in the deep end while some others of us were sort of floundering around.
And I think it goes back to some of the earlier questions and comments around mobility across the APS is when you have a really productive and outcome-focused approach to flexible work, it provides opportunity to prove that it can be done and it can be done well. doesn't mean it doesn't have its challenges. There's technical difficulties. You still need to connect with people to be able to work well with them. But there's ways you can do that are really effective. That can, hopefully down the line influence how APS service delivery and policy delivery and all those things are done across the country.
I might pick up on that last comment you just made, actually, because there's a question there that's come through specifically for you, Holly. Someone would like to know how your lived experience in the Northern Territory helps influence policy and implementation when it comes to Northern development.
Great question. So I think one of the advantages I have is that I was born here, I grew up here, and I come from a couple of Darwin local families. I went to school here, etc., etc. So the people that I talk to every day, the people that are in my family, that are my friends, etc., etc., aren't all public servants and aren't all APS public servants specifically. So, when we talk about working, with real Australians or the quiet Australians or whatever the terminology you want to use, those are my people. So that means that you have that layer on top of the policy that you're developing. So whether it's anecdotal evidence and then going out to organisations and saying, okay, this is what I'm hearing, can you give me the data to back it up? And in particular, I think, so that's how I suppose I apply in a personal context. Is it gives you a different way of looking at things and a different way. You ask different questions, but then I think some of the ways that we apply that for Northern Development and Plan for O&A, and a good example of this is some infrastructure projects. So through again looking at the data and going, okay, well, all of this infrastructure projects, we're not getting any funding across the north, and that's because the risk matrix doesn't really support us essentially because we do have a low population base. There's all this data around it, but we're like, yeah, but we're 50% of the country and we're 11% of GDP, so that means that we are contributing to the broader Australian story. But the infrastructure funding doesn't support that. So through providing data and advocating for the north and providing context and stories and a whole broad of other things, we've sort of seen some outcomes, and that's starting to change in terms of how funding is applied, how funding is delivered through some advocacy work, and that's broadly across other policy areas, but infrastructure is an easy one that comes to mind. We're seeing change in how roads are funded or infrastructure projects are funded through the information that we're given and the people that we talk to, and then being able to support that with data.
Excellent. Let's move. There's a question that's come through on Slido for both speakers. How do you overcome workplace failures? There's a question that I think one of our pre-prepared questions was about managing your own resilience when dealing with difficult work situations and any lessons you've learned. So maybe if we can sort of combine those two together, and either in general terms or in specific terms, if you're comfortable talking about it. It's interesting actually, I'll just digress briefly, because we had at our Tasmania event, we had someone speaking who was basically responsible for the 2016 census, the national census, and the huge, as you remember, there were a lot of issues around that, and he spoke really very, very frankly about what it meant for him and how he dealt with that, and in terms of his team as well, how he dealt with the fallout from that failure, which ended up being, it ended up okay, but it was initially a failure. And people found that really helpful to hear from him. Anyway, so for the both of you, if you're, either in general terms or specific terms, how have you overcome difficult situations or failures in the workplace? What have you learned from that? How have you managed your own resilience when dealing with those situations? I might go to you first, Deb.
Yeah, for me, I think I'm always go back to a senior executive who one of his sayings was, if you're going to fail, fail early. It reminds me not just that, of a tactic of identifying issues, but that failure is an acceptable part of our work process, and that we have to recognise that there will be times when something doesn't work out. I think, failure is a little bit of a harsh word. I think, if we use public servant speak, we could talk about it in terms of risk and, identifying risks and, when they actually play out not just as a theory, but then they happen. And, if we don't have a mitigation in place and there's an issue. I think a lot of our work as public servants, especially in my workplace, is iterative. There's always opportunity to reshape and start again, and a failure isn't actually the end. What comes out of the failure is actually how you rate your role in the workplace, and that comes down to and requires sometimes great personal resilience to be able to recognise that something hasn't gone as planned, or that there's work. Sometimes it's not even extra work that's required, but a total rethink, and to be able to almost shift tracks and start off on a different pathway. So I think the key messages are that, yes, there will be times that we can either say failure or risk has materialised, and that you have to dig deep personally to be able to recognise that, acknowledge it, and then think about the next steps, what comes after the failure. And that's the real point where us as public servants show the real quality of our contribution to a process, and that's thinking about different options. It might be looking at different evidence. It can be 101 different ways to think about what comes next after those situations.
Yeah, thanks for that. In a sense, it could be that that's where you see the commitment to service, which is one of the APS values, can shine, perhaps shine through even more clearly, is when someone is willing to acknowledge that they have, yes, this thing, whatever this thing was, it didn't work the way we hoped or expected, and that was, we'll learn from that and make it better next time around. Holly, what about you? Your thoughts on this idea of failure and resilience?
I think Deb's put it perfectly, actually, and really beautifully. It is kind of, like you said, dig deep, and you kind of go, oh my God, how did that go so badly? Or, how did that end up on that track when that is not what I meant, or whatever it is, but it is about digging deep, kind of stopping, taking that deep breath and going, okay, what went wrong? Why did it go wrong? How can we fix this? Or how can we, it might not even be that it went horribly wrong. It might just be that it didn't get momentum, or it didn't go in the direction that you wanted it to go, or it didn't land how you expected it to. And so sort of taking it and going, okay, well, this is what we've got. How do we build on it? How do we make it better? And kind of being a little bit gentle on yourself too, whether it's yourself as an individual or yourself as a team, and as part of a team, and kind of going, we're only human. We're doing the best we can. Are we okay to keep going the way we are, or do we need to actually stop and pivot in a different direction to deliver something that is going to be better? And how can we learn from that? And how can we learn from the people around us and from mistakes of the past? And the Northern Agenda is probably, it's not a new idea. So what went wrong in the past, and how do we, make sure that this new phase of Northern development actually does deliver for the nation and for us as up here as well, and as individuals and as communities.
Excellent, thanks for that. The connection is sort of a little bit glitchy again, so I think what we might actually do, we're a bit earlier than we anticipated, but I think we might try and just wrap things up, just because I'm concerned that we might sort of all freeze again. So let's go to that last question that I put to Pat just before he left us, which is about, you know, something that a piece of advice you would give your younger self at the point that you were embarking on your APS career, or even just, you know, leaving school for the, you know, what's a piece of advice that you, if you could go back in time, that you would give the younger version of Deb?
I think for me it would be to seriously consider the opportunities within the public service at a younger age than I was when I started, and to remind my younger self that the public service is a really broad space and has many, many different roles and responsibilities that be exciting and interesting and really personal rewarding. I'd also say to enjoy the journey, whatever it brings, and to explore opportunities, both near and far, as they present.
Excellent. Oh, look, that's outstanding advice. Thank you for that. And Holly, what about you?
Yeah, a lot of the same things. And I think have fun. Like, enjoy it. Make mistakes. It's okay. Talk to people. Understand their stories. Where did they go right? Where did they go wrong? And incorporate that. But at the end of the day, try to understand yourself and what works for you. Because I think, like Deb said, understanding your personality and what suits you. I'm a bit the same probably as her. I like to move around. Change doesn't really ruffle me too much. So jumping over different roles and taking opportunities within either just the Office of Northern Australia or broadly within the department is something that I think is exciting and fun. But I know that about myself, and I've probably known that for a long time. So I think delving into that, understanding it and having fun along the way, and talking to people that you respect about the decisions that you make, that I think has been a really helpful tool for me along the way.
Yeah, look, and I'd certainly echo that myself. Some of talking to people, really broadening the scope of who you get advice and bouncing ideas off lots of different people. That can be, there's a huge value in that. Look, I think we'll leave it there. The connection is not particularly stable. I'm getting sort of grimaces from the tech guys over in the corner. But thank you both to Holly and Deb for your time today. Thank you to those who've put questions through via Slido. Apologies for the technical issues, but I guess this is what happens when we're trying to do all these things virtually. It's been great speaking to both of you. It's been great to hear your personal reflections and your personal experience. And yeah, thanks once again. And to everyone who's listening, this is the first time that we've had an entirely virtual, live stream roadshow event. We're very interested to hear your feedback, not so much on the technical side. Can suspect what that might be, but you will receive, everyone who registered for the event will receive a short evaluation. So if you could take, just later this afternoon, if you could take the time to fill that in, that would be wonderful. So thank you once again. We'll sign off there. Enjoy the rest of your day.